Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you're watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today we're going to be looking at 20 highly underrated movies you can currently catch on HBO Max. So this is going to be a list of 20 movies currently available on HBO Max in the US. These movies will be available on different streaming services in different countries, but right now, all of these are included here in the US. But as always, that is subject to change, so make sure you've clicked the subscribe button and the little bell icon if you want to watch these videos as soon as they're released, so you can be sure to catch those movies before they're gone. This video is sponsored by AG1 by Athletic Greens. I'll be telling you more about them later in the video, but right now let's start all the way back at my number 20 pick with a little known movie from 2007 with some big name stars called Deception. Hugh Jackman, Ewan McGregor, and Michelle Williams all star in this thriller. And for a movie that's all the way at the back of a list of 20, this movie really does punch above its weight. Obviously, you've got great performances from those three, but this is a pretty taut thriller. Now, I will say, for a thriller with a lot of twists and turns, I did see some of them coming like a mile away, but there were others that were really well hidden, so this one's kind of a mixed bag. It's also a pretty sexy movie. In this movie, Ewan McGregor plays an accountant who gets invited to a sex club by a lawyer played by Hugh Jackman. And as cool as that might sound, things go in a dark direction very quickly. After a woman goes missing, things become increasingly complicated for this little accountant played by Ewan McGregor. It's pretty good stuff if you like these sort of darker edged thrillers. And if you're a fan of the people involved, this is kind of a cool movie that they did that just not enough people saw. As always with these lists of lesser known movies, there's quite a range of genres. My next pick is a great example of that. It is a horror comedy called Bad Milo.
What is it?
You got a thing in your butt.
Now this movie is for a very narrow group of you watching, so I'll be somewhat brief, but this has some fantastic, if not really funny, practical effects. Essentially, this movie is about a guy who poops out this little critter who is living inside of him that goes by the name Milo, and it's a vicious little creature, and the jokes in this movie are really funny, especially if you're a fan of cult classics like Basket Case. Any old school 80s body horror movies, if you're a fan of those, Bad Milo is full of really good laughs. However, if you're not already turned on to that horror subgenre, then I don't know that Bad Milo is going to be the pick for you off of this list, so let's move on. My next pick is a really great movie starring Val Kilmer, and it's actually written and directed by David Mamet, who does a fantastic job with sort of pressure cooker, boiler room type dialogue. Spartan is not as good as the best Val Kilmer movies or best David Mamet movies, which is why it's lesser known, but it's still a really slick thriller. Now this is also about a disappearing girl, but in this movie Val Kilmer is tasked with bringing her back. Think Taken, but much more realistic, much more grounded, and it's much more of a mystery movie. And all of that is great, but again, it's David Mamet. He's famous for having written things like Glengarry Glen Ross, so you get some really intense, fantastic dialogue, great performance from Val Kilmer, one of the last really good ones that he did, and somehow this movie is still lesser known despite it having pretty good reviews. So if you're a fan of anything that I've described there, this is an excellent thriller, even if it just feels maybe a little bit dated. Now my next pick is another thriller with some years on it, but it does not feel dated. In fact, it feels pretty fresh and new, but at the same time, this one's also not going to be for everybody, particularly if you're afraid of tight spaces. Ryan Reynolds, and only Ryan Reynolds, stars in Buried. In this movie, he wakes up in a wooden box, seemingly buried deep underground. Think that scene in Kill Bill Volume 2, except this one lasts about 90 minutes. That said, they did an excellent job keeping the ball moving. I mean, you're literally spending over an hour in a box with Ryan Reynolds. His performance carries it, and the way that they directed it. The lighting changes from scene to scene miraculously. It actually does work pretty well, and that also aids in keeping things moving, but the plot develops really well. Every time you think you're about to gas out on this movie, it's too much time in the box, something dramatic happens, the pace changes, and it keeps you invested. I don't know that I would have wanted to spend a full 2 hours in this box, but for the runtime of this movie, this is a pretty excellent little experiment of a movie. My next pick is another comedy that I think is just highly underrated. It's from 1994, and it's underrated despite the fact that it stars Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, Steve Buscemi, and Brendan Fraser in Airheads.
Cops are going to get Kayla. I cut a deal with them. We got to send one person out.
I'll go. One of the hostages, doof. Sorry.
Now, this is a movie that you may have seen pop up on Comedy Central over the years or some of those networks and maybe didn't think too much of it, but it is actually a pretty solid flick. In this movie, a struggling rock band takes a radio station hostage in order to get their music on the air, and it kind of turns into a Dog Day Afternoon situation. Now, there are better hostage comedies, but the fact that you get all of these guys in one room together really makes this thing work. Everybody is funny. And this is not an Adam Sandler movie. This is kind of as he was on his way up. He's really playing second fiddle to these people. If anything, Brendan Fraser is the lead, and he does a great job carrying a comedy movie with some legends like Chris Farley and Adam Sandler. So even if you're not a fan of traditional Adam Sandler movies, this is not one. This is kind of just a cool rock and roll 90s comedy flick that just is not a cult classic, even though I think it maybe deserves to be. But on that note, something that has become a staple in my household very quickly is today's sponsor, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Over the past couple of years, I've gone through a lot of changes. I've become a full-time YouTuber, but I've also gotten in some of the best shape of my life by a lot. And I attribute that to a lot of things, exercise, diet, but one thing that I have included in that diet is AG1 by Athletic Greens, which is an easy, convenient powder you mix into an 8-ounce glass of water, and it's completely packed with vitamins, minerals, probiotics, and adaptogens. And I gotta tell you, mixing Athletic Greens as a regular part of my diet with a solid exercise routine has made me feel better than I've ever felt in my life. I mean, with all the protein I've added to my diet, I really do not have space in my stomach for the amount of leafy greens I would need to eat to get all of the benefits I get in just one glass of AG1. And right now, when my viewers use the link in the video description below, they're gonna get a special gift. They're gonna get a free year of vitamin D3 and vitamin K2, which is gonna further support your immune system. And I honestly don't know why you wouldn't want to have the strongest immune system possible right now. But when you order, you're gonna get all this stuff, the nice big bag of Athletic Greens, this high quality metal jar to store it in the fridge, the bottle, the scoop, and the free gift. By the way, that free gift also comes with 5 travel packs. Again, when you use my link in the video description below, you'll get that free gift of a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and some additional travel packs. It's a fantastic thing to include to your routine if you're the least bit concerned about your health, which you should be. But with that, let's go ahead and move on with the top 15 movies on this list. Charlize Theron stars in my next pick, and it's one of her lesser-known movies, Young Adult. In this movie, she plays a writer of young adult novels, and she's an older woman who has never really grown up, and she goes back to her hometown and learns that she's never really grown up. And not only do you get a great performance from her, there's a really fantastic supporting cast, but this is a talky drama. But this was actually written by Diablo Cody and directed by Jason Reitman, the same writer-director team for Juno. I don't think Young Adult is as good as Juno. It's not quite as funny. In fact, it's much more cringy than Juno was, but still solid stuff, and it makes a solid point. If you enjoyed Juno, then Young Adult is actually a pretty interesting follow-up that makes some different points about a somewhat similar subject. Another fantastic thriller in a similar vein to Deception is Wicker Park. In this movie, Josh Hartnett plays a young man who sees a woman at a distance and believes her to be this long-lost love, and he begins to trail her. As simple as that setup sounds, Wicker Park becomes a very complicated, twisted movie. In fact, this director would go on to direct Hartnett again just a couple years later in Lucky Number 11, which I think is a superior and more fun movie. But still, Wicker Park is expertly directed and again full of twists and turns. It feels a little bit dated today, but not too much, and it is packed with surprises. If you generally like these types of movies, then I can tell you Wicker Park is an exceptional one. 71 is a movie that takes place in 1971 in Belfast. In this movie, Jack O'Connell plays a British soldier who gets left behind by his unit in Belfast following a riot, and he basically has to survive the night. The more you know about the history of the conflict between the British government and Ireland, the better, because this British soldier in 1971 is trying to survive the night in Northern Ireland while plenty of IRA members are hunting him down, and he's left to the mercy of people who are not very friendly towards the British at this point in history. So it makes for some very intense moments, and it's just an excellent film. It's a little bit narrow, a little bit simple. You're really just following this one character, but still, it's expertly done and also gives you a little bit more insight into this conflict that was taking place in the 70s, because it is one that there are several movies on, but largely it kind of doesn't get talked about that much, at least not here in the US. Now, Uncut Gems was one of my favorite movies of 2019. I've talked about it quite a few times. That movie's probably gonna live on Netflix forever because it was a Netflix original in quite a few countries. But another movie that came out around the same time that is also this fast-paced thriller that takes place in the New York Diamond District is KILLERMAN. In this movie, Liam Hemsworth actually plays a money launderer running around the streets of the New York Diamond District trying to make deals when he's in a sudden car accident and then is stricken with amnesia and can't really remember who he is or who he owes money to or anything like that, and it becomes a major problem at this moment in his life. This is directed by Malik Bader, who only did 2 other movies prior to this, 2 movies that I've talked about on the channel before. I really like this guy as a director. I think he's one of the more underrated directors working today, and he doesn't do that many films, I think, as a result, but KILLERMAN is an exceptional flick. It just maybe got overshadowed by a superior one with Uncut Gems. However, this movie is more accessible than Uncut Gems, so if that's one that you wanted to get into and you felt like it was a little too chaotic, KILLERMAN is more accessible. But also, if you loved Uncut Gems, then KILLERMAN makes kind of a great double feature to it. Guy Ritchie makes this list with one of his lesser-known movies, Revolver. Now, despite being one of his lesser-known movies, Revolver stars Jason Statham, Ray Liotta, Andre 3000, Mark Strong, and a handful of Guy Ritchie alumni that you're going to recognize. The thing that makes Revolver stand out in Guy Ritchie's filmography is it is a very cerebral, thinky movie. You get almost right off the bat that this does not take place in our reality. It's this otherworldly type thing with lots of symbolism. In fact, symbolism is almost exclusively what Revolver uses to communicate with the audience, almost to the point of exhaustion. In fact, this movie is in its own head so much, I think that might be why it's one of his lesser known movies. But if that interests you at all, maybe you're a fan of Guy Ritchie and you've never seen this one, it is a total gem. Just be prepared to dive into it more than you normally would with a Guy Ritchie movie. Now that Ozark is officially over, if you still can't get enough Jason Bateman, he actually directed a comedy movie several years back that is excellent and just never got the respect it deserved. Bad Words. In this movie, he plays a grown man who has entered a children's spelling bee, and not only is he awful to most of the kids in this movie, it's just awful that he's taking trophies from children, and everybody else in this movie, almost everybody, absolutely hates him. Now, as simple as that setup is, Bad Words is actually an excellent story. It's got a lot of meat on the bone, a lot more than you would expect. Obviously, Bateman does an incredible job. He's incredibly funny despite being a really unlikable character, and he did a hell of a job directing this thing. I wish he directed more things. Every time he's in the director's chair, I think it's gold, and he just doesn't do it that often. He must not like it that much, but Bad Words is one of the funnier movies of the past 10 years, one of. Especially if you either don't mind or you love cringe humor, then Bad Words is gonna be right up your alley. As long as you're not easily offended. Let's just say that, as long as you're not easily offended. Longtime subscribers know I really love Nicolas Cage. I watch almost all of his movies, even the really, really bad ones, but one of his best and most underrated movies, I think, is Matchstick Men, directed by Ridley Scott. Now right off the bat, this movie has a beautiful look to it. Ridley Scott directed the pants off of it, and Nicolas Cage is doing a really fantastic character because he's doing two things at once. He's doing the really neurotic, on-edge Nicolas Cage, and he's also doing some really tender stuff in this movie as well. In this movie, he plays a con man who has severe OCD. Sam Rockwell plays his right-hand man and does an excellent job. He's been one of my favorite actors of all time, and having these two guys in the same movie just makes it all that much better. But Nicolas Cage takes a young woman under his wing and starts teaching her how to do certain grifts. That segment of the movie is really interesting. You get to see how cons are pulled off, and it's just kind of like fun, interesting stuff. But the movie does take a dark turn, and it kind of turns into a thriller. But overall, this is just an excellent, well-rounded movie with great performances, amazing cinematography, and a pretty excellent story as well. Alright, now let's switch things up again with a somewhat cult classic horror movie that's actually directed by Guillermo del Toro. Now, del Toro has gone on to win Academy Awards and be one of the most famous movie makers in the world working today, but one of his earliest movies is still a really excellent horror flick, Mimic. This was his first American theatrical release, and it seems on the surface like just kind of another Friday night horror movie. It actually starts fairly slow paced, but it turns into this wild, epic underground adventure with crazy monsters, some amazing sequences, and again, consider this movie came out in 1997. It looks amazing. It looks like it came out yesterday in most scenes. It's one of my favorite movies. I've ever seen Mira Sorvino in, and she's in a bunch of great stuff. And you also get Josh Brolin in this movie before he was a household name, so that's kind of cool too. But overall, just an excellent horror movie that, while it's scary, it's not going to scare the pants off of you, so this could be a great sort of action-adventure one for people who don't like really terrifying horror movies, but still, fantastic stuff from Del Toro. It's one of my favorite lesser-known movies of his. Speaking of early movies from award-winning directors, Wes Anderson makes the list with his very first feature film, Bottle Rocket.
All right, I'll see you later on.
Need any help? No, I think I got it.
Okay.
Now, out of everything Wes Anderson has ever directed, this feels the least like a Wes Anderson movie because he hadn't really honed his style yet. However, it's still present. It's still there in this movie. Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson both star in this, and it's also one of their first movies. I think a lot of people don't know that they actually went to college with Wes Anderson, did a short film in black and white called Bottle Rocket, and then went on to make this feature film that still holds up today. None of the humor or anything in it is topical at all. You're really just watching these interesting, strange Wes Anderson-like characters do some interesting things, including pull off a heist. Now, I wouldn't call Bottle Rocket a heist movie. There's a heist sequence in it, but if you're a fan of Wes Anderson in any kind of way, you've liked any single one of his movies, from Rushmore to his most recent, The French Dispatch, then Bottle Rocket is one that you need to see. I mean, it's just early Wes Anderson, early Owen Wilson. It's fantastic stuff that amazingly, again, still holds up today. It is a really funny movie, regardless of your feelings of Wes Anderson. Raise your hand if you've ever been in an elevator that has a button for the 13th floor. Yeah, I haven't either. But come on, if you're staying on the 14th floor, you know what floor you're really on. But that brings me to my next pick, which is a sci-fi cult classic, The 13th Floor. This movie revolves around a virtual reality simulation of 1937, but it goes into some wild, dark territory with some major twists and turns. Like I said, this is a cult classic. It does have somewhat of a following and has held up over the years. It's actually still got a 7.0 rating on IMDb, which is pretty high. You do get a great role from Vincent D'Onofrio in this one, but the cast is largely unknown or smaller, like TV actors, and I think that works for this movie. It makes it feel like its own product. You're not distracted by famous people in it. If you've never seen it, this is gonna make for a fantastic sci-fi gem. It's an amazing movie that's got some fantastic visuals and some turns in it that, like I said, does have a small following, but out of all the things available on HBO Max right now, this is one of the cooler sci-fi movies that you've probably never seen. Put it on your list. I mean, honestly, if you've clicked on this video, you're still watching it, you're looking for really cool movies that you've never seen, The 13th Floor is definitely gonna scratch that itch. Now, there have been some amazing movies on this list so far, but now we're to my top 5. They're all excellent movies, starting with one for the whole family, Mouse Hunt. Now, this is a movie, again, that has somewhat of a cult following, but it is largely underrated. This is directed by Gore Verbinski. It's one of his first movies. He would go on to do the Pirates of the Caribbean and all manner of big budget spectacles. Mouse Hunt is a smaller movie, but still a big spectacle of a movie about a little mouse. Now, this movie does have kind of a classic movie feel to it, kind of an Abbott and Costello thing. And it's a very simple setup. It's a couple of brothers remodeling a house. There's a mouse in there that keeps wreaking havoc, but all the gags are really funny, not just in the way that they were written, in the way that they are carried out, in the way that they are shot. This movie, again, I cannot stress how beautiful this movie is. Even though you're spending most of it in this dark, drab house, Gore Verbinski makes everything just look visually stunning. Mouse Hunt is a great example of that, but it's also really, really funny. I mean, the chemistry between Nathan Lane and Lee Evans is just top-notch stuff. That's what really carries the movie. But then you get these great little one-off performances from people like Christopher Walken that also help add all these moments to the movie that make Mouse Hunt really fantastic. If you never bothered to watch this, it is a fantastic movie to watch with the family. However, if you don't have a family, you're just watching this at home by yourself, I don't care what age you are, Mouse Hunt is an excellent movie that I highly recommend. Another excellent movie that I highly recommend is Gone Baby Gone, starring Casey Affleck, Morgan Freeman, Ed Harris, and Michelle Monaghan, and this was actually directed by Ben Affleck. And all the performances are fantastic. They're as good as you would expect from all those folks. The directing by Affleck is better than you would expect, but the story comes from Dennis Lehane, who wrote the novel this movie's based on. He also wrote the novels that Shutter Island and Mystic River would then be based on. So fantastic pedigree, but this one's about a child who is missing and the investigation that ensues, and the mother who is somewhat suspicious, but nobody knows whether she's just reacting poorly to the situation or she had something to do with it. You've got law enforcement who are hiding things. There's all sorts of twists and turns in Gone Baby Gone, yet it always feels grounded and realistic. Again, just fantastic stuff from a group of people that obviously know what they're doing. Now, I already mentioned my love for Nicolas Cage in this video, and while I don't have another Nicolas Cage movie, I will tell you, if you saw his most recent movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, then you know, no spoilers, but you know there is a running joke regarding Paddington 2. I myself died laughing in the movie theater when I saw that because Paddington 2 is actually an excellent movie, and I think I said as much out loud in the movie theater, which I normally don't do. So the original Paddington is a fantastic family movie. It's got some great performances from some great actors like Nicole Kidman, but Paddington 2 took things to another level, and it honestly feels like a Wes Anderson movie or something, yet it's more accessible, meaning it's gonna entertain your kids, it's not too dry or too thinky. However, there is quite a bit of depth there for a children's movie. Again, there are times and moments in this movie where it feels like an Academy Award-winning Wes Anderson movie, and it is that level of a movie. I believe this was nominated for Best Picture when it came out, and is an excellent, excellent movie. Again, I thought Paddington was a great movie to watch with the kids. Paddington 2 is probably, honestly, one of the best movies ever made that has two in the title. Those movies generally are pretty garbage, and Paddington 2 is just a total surprise of a movie. There's no reason that this movie should be nearly as good as it is, but it is. Alright, my number 2 pick on this list is the newest release on this list. It stars Ben Foster as a Holocaust survivor in The Survivor. This movie tells the true story of Harry Haft, who became a boxer in America after having survived Auschwitz. Ben Foster gives one of the best performances of his career, which is saying something because he has given some stellar performances over the years. Not only is his performance amazing, but he also underwent a pretty amazing body transformation. In the Holocaust sequences, he is very thin and emaciated. It is not enhanced with computers. His body really is in that state. And then they show him years later boxing in America, where he has significantly more weight on him. I mean, the weight swing that he underwent in this movie was bigger than Raging Bull. And I make that comparison because there's quite a bit of comparisons to make. I think if you were a fan of Raging Bull, you will like a lot of the themes and boxing sequences in The Survivor. But do not forget, this is also a movie about surviving the Holocaust. And it puts some themes into play that are very different than anything I'd seen in a Holocaust movie, like the price and the cost of survival. There is a lot of moral ambiguity in The Survivor, which you typically don't get with movies that take place during this period. They're a little more cut and dry more often in my experience, but The Survivor did something a little different, really setting it apart and making it, I think, something special to watch. If you watch this video this far and you're looking for a really good movie on HBO Max, I highly recommend checking out The Survivor. But that brings us to my number 1 pick, which is from one of my all-time favorite directors, Michael Mann. And while it's not one of his least known movies, it is one of his more underappreciated movies, Collateral. Now, I have loved this movie for years, mainly because I love the way that this was shot. This was one of the first movies to come out in theaters that used a lot of digital cameras. Now, shortly after that, almost everything in theaters would be filmed on digital cameras, but Collateral has an interesting mix of film and digital that gives this movie a really great look. Speaking of looks, I absolutely love that Tom Cruise does not really look like himself in this movie. But if you've never seen Collateral, Tom Cruise plays a hitman, which goes very against type for him. You don't see him playing a bad guy very often. And Jamie Foxx plays a cab driver who has been hired to drive him around LA for the night as he, quote unquote, does his business. Now, it's a simple setup, and there are some major plot holes here that you kind of have to forgive in order to kind of go along for this ride with Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx. And if you do that, this makes for an excellent, wild night of a movie. Now, I will say, Collateral takes quite a bit of time getting in. You've got this long, talky sequence with Jada Pinkett Smith that you kind of, again, I watched it recently, you kind of have to muscle through that. But once the major plot twist kicks in, about 15-20 minutes in, this movie does not stop. I absolutely love it. I love the story, the setup, the characters, the look of it. The soundtrack is fantastic for this movie, and it just makes for a killer flick that I know most of you haven't watched on HBO Max yet. I recommend checking it out before it's gone because it will not be there forever. Again, on that note, make sure you've clicked that subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when videos like this come out so you can catch the movies before they're gone. But if you want additional recommendations, go to my site, DarrenVanDam.com. There are movie recommendations right there on the homepage, updated weekly. You can also sign up for my newsletter, and I'll email you movie recommendations directly to your inbox. It's completely free, but I will keep making videos like this one right here on YouTube as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special HBO Max episode, and you will see me on the next one.